Our leader told us that we deserve to be called champions because we played like champions. Now, we didn't end up with quite enough on that scoreboard, and we weren't going to be voted, but it was just his way of talking to us and, quote, leading us. If he would have said some other types of things, I'm not sure what would have happened after that game. But our leader told us that in his book, we were champions, and that's all that mattered to me.
Welcome to Inside the Coaching Mind, conversations on leadership, coaching, and team building. Your host, Terry Pettit, led the University of Nebraska-Cornhusker volleyball team from 1977 to 1999 and coached Nebraska's first ever national championship in 1995. Today, Coach Pettit mentors coaches, authors books, and presents to corporations and businesses on leadership and team building. I'm Dave Young, producer of the podcast. Thanks for joining us. Terry, a fun interview, an interesting interview, and one that brings back lots of memories for anybody that's paid any attention to Nebraska football and Nebraska sports over the years.
Trev Alberts, the director of athletics at the University of Nebraska, he's had an interesting journey. Most ADs today have a law degree or an MBA. When I began at Nebraska, Coach Devaney was the AD, and at that time, the typical AD was a former coach. That's no longer the case. But Trev was a player at Nebraska, a decorated player, won the Butkus Award as the outstanding linebacker in the country in 1993, played in the Orange Bowl in 1994 for the national championship against Florida State, was drafted in the first round by the NFL as the fifth player in the draft by the Indianapolis Colts, where he went and was injured for 3 years and left professional football. Trev will say in this broadcast that he's one of the top 5 busts in NFL history. Following that, he went into broadcasting for several years. Right. CBS, Sports Illustrated, ESPN. And then Nebraska-Omaha came calling for him to be their athletic director. And he went to the University of Nebraska-Omaha, where he made a decision that was quite controversial at the time. UNO at that time was a Division II school, but they were facing significant financial challenges. And he was charged with coming up with a 25-year plan that would allow them to be solvent. And that involved moving from Division II to Division I, but dropping football. And it was quite the thing at the time. And then recently, a year ago, he was named Director of Athletics at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And we talk about a lot of things. We talk about leadership, talk about leaving athletics, talk about men's basketball at Nebraska, which has had its worst 3 seasons in the history of the sport, and football, which is not far behind. So it's a lively discussion, and I think everybody's going to enjoy it.
Well, I enjoyed being a fly on the wall as you recorded it, and here it is.
Trev Alberts, welcome to Inside the Coaching Mind. It's great to have you here. I only got to, when I was coaching at Nebraska, I only got to one bowl game in the 26 years I was there. Now part of that was that we were entering the NCAA tournament in mid-December each year. And even when there was a January bowl, by that time I was exhausted and or recruiting, one or the other. But the one that I did get to was in 1994. And it was Nebraska, an undefeated Nebraska team playing Florida State in the Orange Bowl. You were a senior co-captain, outside linebacker. I used to call that position rush end.
That's right. Yep. You get right, Coach.
And I remember, I believe it was your left arm, but I'm not positive. But you had an arm in a cast.
Yeah, my right elbow.
Yeah. Your right elbow. Okay. And I would have to say, first of all, it was a remarkable game. It ended, as I recall, with a missed field goal attempt by Nebraska to win the game.
Right.
Would have been Coach Osborne's first national championship. And you may have played as strong a game as a defensive player that I had ever seen live, for certainly. I think you had 3 sacks for something like 29 yards lost, and I didn't know whether that was if that cast was really a tool, like to try and persuade the opponents that you were injured. But when I look back at the score, it seemed like there was more scoring in the game than I remembered. But that was in January of 1994.
Yep.
If someone had asked you at that point what it meant, what leadership was, what leadership was on a Nebraska football team, what would you have said then?
Well, Coach, the great blessing that I've had in my life is I've just had a chance to be around, observe, watch. I mean, my dad was a great leader, still is a great leader. But, you get a chance to just have, for me, it was 4.5. I redshirted my first year, 4.5 years of Tom Osborne. And, there's a lot of leadership sayings. There's a lot of people who talk a good game in leadership. But leadership to me is about, authentic leadership. It's personal example, it's actions. And, for me, I'll never forget at the close of that game. And I remember, like you, it did feel like there was more scoring, mostly because what I loved about that game was it felt like every single play mattered. Sometimes in football, you're playing and you get down to the end and then, a little bit like volleyball, when we were in Columbus with Wisconsin, every single serve felt like it could be the determinant. Is this going to be the play that, and so that I think was part of it. But, none of us knew that that Coach Osborne was going to win the next, that Nebraska would win the next 2. I mean, I just remember going into that game, it was 10 years since Nebraska had played for a national championship. It was 1983 with Turner Gill in the same Orange Bowl. And, we felt like, and we had heard all the narrative about Bobby Bowden, just was that close to winning the big one. And everybody was focused on Coach Bowden. And I love Coach Bowden. But it was like, well, what about our guy? It's been a while for him too. And what I saw in leadership that day was after we lost that game, and it was absolutely devastating because, as you know, to get to that level, you put so much into it. And after we lost that game, and Coach Osborne walked into the locker room and essentially said, well, we're all crying and feeling sorry for ourselves. He basically said, men, I don't know how to tell you this. I understand that when they do the vote, of course, this is pre-playoffs and BCS and all that. It was just, the UPI and the AP. When they do the vote, you're not going to be named national champions. But I want you to know that in my mind, this is a national championship team. Because you see, in my mind, you played like champions. And I don't know, it was everybody was fine then. Everybody suddenly, nobody felt sorry for themselves anymore. Our leader told us that we deserve to be called champions because we played like champions. Now, we didn't end up with quite enough on that scoreboard and, we weren't going to be voted. But it was just his way of talking to us and, quote, leading us. If he would have said some other types of things, I'm not sure what would have happened after that game. But, our leader told us that in his book, we were champions. And that's all that mattered to me.
Yeah, that's a wonderful story. And watching the game, maybe because I was a Nebraska fan, I kind of felt, even though it was close all the time, that Nebraska was the better team, but maybe that was just bias on my part. I had the feeling that we were winning.
We were the better team. They had better players.
That's an interesting by that, and explain what you mean by that, Trev.
Well, we had, what I loved about Coach Osborne was just the transparency with which he communicated to us as players. There were no secrets in the Nebraska football program. Every game we went into, he would honestly talk to the entire team, and he'd say, okay, gentlemen, this week, obviously we're going to play XYZ team, and I want you to know that we have more talent than them. And if we play a clean game, we're going to win the game handily. And he would tell us that. Mm-hmm. But if we don't play a clean game and we lay the ball on the ground, or we don't play with effort, or we don't play as a team, this is a team that can beat us on a given day. Well, we went into the game at Florida State, and Coach, he said, that Florida State has more talent than we have. They have better individual players, but they have not paid a similar price that you've paid in order to get here. So you've paid a bigger price in terms of commitment and effort. And secondly, we have a better team. We have more unity of purpose. We have more guys that are playing for the guy next to them rather than for themselves. And we're unified. And, the strength of unity, of having all 11 guys on each side of the ball playing, for each other and in concert is much more powerful than individual talent. And that was what, Coach created. Was we weren't always the most talented team, but we would be the hardest working team, the most unified, and the team that had paid a bigger price to get to the spot in that game. And that was a great confidence booster going into the game. So they were more talented, Coach.
Trev, I hadn't thought of this till right now, but is it harder to bring about that unity on a team of 150 players than a team of 12 players? You go to different position coaches, offense meets, defense meets. Are there dynamics there that make that a little bit more difficult?
Well, I mean, I've not been a coach, but I could imagine that it might be. Now, obviously, you have more people and some more resources, but I think that's why in football in particular, leadership in the head coaching position is so critical, because you think about what that individual has to demand. I mean, first of all, you've got to create that kind of unity with your coaching staff. And, back in those days, I think you had the limit of the NCAA, I don't know how many coaches, 8 or 9 total coaches. When you think about college football today, with all of the analysts and all of the interns and externs and all the recruiting folks, I mean, the truth of the matter is that if you become a head football coach in the Power 5 in 2022, you're not doing a whole lot of coaching. You're the chief executive of $100 million annual enterprise. And that's a totally different skill set than being a ball coach.
But is that to some degree, is that by choice? I mean, are there head football coaches that are actively drawing up plays, that are actively maybe having a significant input on defense?
Well, I think, I think the best ones that I've been around, and I'm going to use Coach Osborne. Now, he just broke the mold of everything. You can't use Coach Osborne as an example because it's not fair to everybody else. Because here was a guy that was the quote offensive coordinator, called every play, but yet during practice, we had 4 stations.
Right.
And and the guy never missed anything. I swear to you, he'd not come over to your little unit the entire time. The one time you make a false step, of course, coach sees it and says, Trev, and so he saw everything. And he walked around. He knew he wasn't calling the defense, but he knew everything. And I think that's part of what great leadership is, you have a tendency to say, well, I've got a coordinator for that, and it's not micromanaging. It's making sure you understand every side of what's going on and why it's happening. And so you can ask the right questions and frankly, create the right level of accountability and the expectations for each of those folks. So, I don't know, to answer your question, how many coaches are really doing that, but I think the best ones understand it, and they're clearly communicating what their expectations are, and then holding those people in those critical areas accountable.
You leave Nebraska, you're drafted in the first round, and I think you were the fifth player drafted. You go to the Indianapolis Colts. You play there 3 years, and I think you're injured probably 40% of the time. And I'm curious, when you decided to leave football, and I've seen this with athletes that I've coached, some handle that transition really well and some don't. It's hard because it's been an identity. It's been something you've worked at for so long. How were there any challenges for you when that happened?
Oh, there were significant challenges, Coach. And I would say of anybody, I felt like, I should have been the most well-positioned to the transition easily. I mean, I had a family that loved me, that was very involved in my life. I was recently married. I had a great education, had wonderful relationships. But I'll tell you, it's one of the things that I don't know that we in all of our universities have done a great job of is, we do a great job of development while they're student athletes, but what are we doing when the cheering stops? Mm-hmm. And, the truth of the matter is, I was balancing. I had never really been injured until that final game against Oklahoma my senior year, which led to the brace in the Orange Bowl. But I had dislocated my elbow again, my first game in my rookie year, preseason game against the Seahawks.
Same elbow?
Same elbow. Yeah. So I had torn all the ligaments on one side, and then in the NFL, I tore all the other side. So I ended up having Tommy John surgery, like a baseball pitcher.
Oh, wow.
So I blew, and then I had to take part of my Achilles tendon out because I didn't have the traditional plantar tendon that a lot of people have. And then I had both shoulders that went, and I love it. Part of it was subconsciously you're trying to protect the elbow, and then I suppose the shoulder goes. So I was dealing with the frustration of being, and to this day, I'm probably in the top 10 of, least productive and largest NFL flops in NFL history, which was really hard for me. I mean, I was so determined to be successful, and it was the first time, Coach, in my life where I couldn't just outwork people. I always, my dad raised us that if for whatever reason you weren't, then that person was just working harder than you and paying a bigger price than you. I never left Indianapolis. I stayed there year round. That was a real time of frustration where I wasn't able to accomplish what I'd hoped to. So I get done, not knowing what to do, how to transition. Without going into too much detail, because many of these people I'm good friends with now, but I actually went and met with several executives throughout the state of Nebraska. And so I'm 26 years old. Thankfully, we had some capital and I could eat, but nobody was interested in hiring me.
Hiring you in the business world?
In any capacity.
In any capacity.
And that was really, discouraging. Not for those people, but it was just back to your part about transitioning. Here you are on top of the world, playing in the national championship, playing in a place like Nebraska where nobody cares for student athletes more than this place. And
Trev, that shocks me. That really surprises me, because I don't know of any more loyal fan base than Nebraska.
Well, and I'm not done. So I went and I had interviewed with with several and was, not interested. And I honestly think that Coach Osborne made a call for me. And the Stewart family and NBC Bank was kind enough to let me come aboard. And I don't know if it was for charity or what. And but I just remember that being it was just that moment of transition where, hey, this cheering has stopped. Now it's finding a way to transition into nobody's going to drop ad for you anymore. And it was just I think you couple that with being a failure in the NFL. It was I would be, and I met my wife. We've been married now 26 years. She's my best friend, but at that time, you think about the stress on a young family. We barely knew each other. Had been married for a short while, and she's pregnant with our first child, and so I just remember it being a very, very stressful time trying to figure out, what's going to happen and how do I move from here.
Well, thanks for sharing that. And it's good to share. It's good to be intimate in that way because the public doesn't quite understand that people that are in a position that you're in right now have gone through those things, and to some degree, if you're open to it, have benefited from some of that. It gives you insight. So you go into broadcasting, and I believe you were with CBS Sports and SI, and then your final 3 years with ESPN.
And actually, I went with CNN for 5 years. Then I went to ESPN for 3 years, and I ended up at CBS Sports Network for the final 3. So,
okay.
Yeah.
And we had a mutual friend in Jeff Schmall, who we both greatly missed. One of the most positive people, but Jeff, I had one rule with Jeff when we played golf. He could only ask one question on each hole. But he felt that you were going to be an exceptional analyst, an exceptional broadcaster, and he was disappointed he wasn't able to persuade you that was the path you needed to continue to take. Is that an accurate? And I don't know. Did you have conversations with him about that?
Yeah, I sought his input. So that was an interesting story too. So I'm working at NBC Bank. I just literally started, and I get a phone call from my old football agent who said, "Hey, I got a call from a guy named Jim Walton, who says he's the president of CNN Sports Illustrated, who they're going to start a college football show on CNN, and they wanted to know if you wanted to audition." Well, the story goes, so Jim Walton is, first of all, a big Nebraska football fan, comes to games, and a relative of Don Walton of the Lincoln Journal-Star.
Oh, yes, great columnist.
He's a tremendous columnist and an icon for the Lincoln Journal-Star. And so I don't know if he was here in town, saw me get interviewed or anyway, but said he should audition. And so that's how it all happened. I didn't really set out on was not something that was on my radar, but I did seek out, Jeff's counsel, and he was really good at kind of, painting a clear picture about the challenges of local media, and then what potential opportunities could be out there nationally. And you got to remember now, we're old enough, Terry, that a lot of people think ESPN's been around for 300 years. They haven't. So the explosion of ESPN2 was started my senior year. I did one of the first interviews with Susie Colbert and Craig James. They were doing college football shows, and I think it was Keith Olbermann was on there as well. And so that's they were just kind of exploding in their coverage, so that whole sort of media business of 24-hour sports coverage was kind of new, and ultimately, Jeff really gave me some confidence about, if you're going to do it, go down there and see if you can get it. And then I was fortunate enough to get an opportunity to work there, and it was really interesting. I had a lot of wonderful experiences at ESPN, but as they were changing into, they wanted more arguing, to make a long story short. They wanted, the contentious debate style. And
Stephen A. Smith.
Yeah, that was before, that's when that was really starting. And so Mark and I have so many people that say, I bet you just about punch. Mark May is a really good friend of mine. We've kept in touch. He's a really good dude. But a lot of what, we did there was a little bit manufactured in a way, and it just didn't feel great. And quite frankly, as I was getting older and our kids were getting a little bit older, I didn't like the angry guy deal.
One more question. Did covering college football, professional football, did anything happen during that time that gave you even more insight into coaching and what's involved in preparing a team to play on the weekend?
Yeah, one of the things that I love the most, and I missed this, I got to do it at CBS. I did a little bit with I didn't get to do it at ESPN, but I got to actually do games. And so I'd go sit down with coaches. And, one of the things that was most remarkable to me is and I've told this to some of our own coaches, including Coach Frost. I'd go meet with the head coach and I'd say, so how's it going? And they'd say, yeah. I said, what do you mean? And almost to a person, they'd say, I got into this business because I love coaching football to young men. And I like to see them come in and then train them, and then in designing plays and the whole competitive piece. And they said, I've become a head coach now, and I'm not doing any coaching. All I do is I deal with the administration. I'm dealing with boosters and donors. I'm dealing with media. And a lot of them just want to coach ball. And I watched some who did a really good job, a little bit as we talked about earlier, of making that transition from, you think about how different your role is when you start as a GA, and then you move to a position coach, and then you're moving to a coordinator. None of those things are really helping you grow in the very areas that demand your leadership abilities as a Division I, Power 5 head coach.
Really?
So that was an interesting, deal that, but from the very beginning, it was pretty clear that those head coaches that had an ability to get there's a lot of different ways of getting the players to run through a wall for them, as the old saying was, right? Of going above and beyond what your natural inclination or your body is telling you that it can do. Those people that created those deep-seated relationships and trust with the players, they're more successful. Mm-hmm. And those coaches worked at it.
When I look at, and I've interacted with hundreds of athletic directors over the years, you hire and fire coaches. You're also charged with development, with raising funds so the athletic department can be successful. You're charged with upgrading infrastructure, making sure that the facilities are at a point where they can be helpful to recruiting. That's a lot of different talents. And I don't know whether one person has all those talents. At least if they do, I'm not the person who's met them yet. Yeah.
Well, I'm certainly not that guy.
But in 2009, when Nebraska-Omaha contacts you about interest in being the next athletic director there, did you have any insight into what an athletic director did?
Coach, I had none. And perhaps if I would have, I might have made a different decision in 2009. In fact, I remember a couple donors after I took the job, they said, I need you to help me understand why you're interested in this job. And the truth of the matter is that I didn't have any idea what it even meant to be an athletic director. I didn't know until I got into athletics, all of the people that are working all day long to serve these young people, to help them be successful. I didn't know the extent to what athletic departments were engaged in that kind of work. So I kind of thought, well, this will be fun. I like to win and I like sports. And I don't have to travel all the time and being away from my family. And I love Nebraska. I didn't even know UNO had an athletic department I did later, but as a student athlete, I never even been in Omaha. I was in Lincoln. And but it was the greatest thing that ever happened to me, I literally was I was thrown into the sea, and you either had to find a way to survive and learn and grow, or it was going to be a short-lived tenure. And
when you were going through that process of considering the job, at what point did you understand that they intended to move toward the consideration of dropping football? Was that
wasn't that was never part of either any conversations in the recruiting process of when I was considering to go to the university. What really was of how it all started was I just was having a little trouble, Coach. I like to win, and the way I kind of think is, all right, let's go define victory, and then let's go make it happen. And no matter what, no matter if we have to go up, under, around, or through, we will get it done, because that's what we do in Nebraska. So I had a couple of meetings with my boss, and John would be happy with me saying, John Christensen, you got to remember also, this was the first boss I ever had in my life. For 17 years out of college, I was an independent contractor. So it was team me. I worked for myself. I reported to my wife, obviously, but I never really had an official boss. And so that was a bit of a learning experience for me too. But I finally, I was trying to figure out, because I only signed a 2-year contract. They had been through 17 athletic directors in 30 years.
Wow.
And I think my boss was concerned that I was either going to be a real failure, or this might be crazy enough to actually work. So when I could tell he wasn't, he was, he said, well, what are you thinking about on the contract? And I said, I don't know. What did the last guy make? And I said, well, maybe just slightly more than that. Otherwise, you might have just kept him. And I could tell he was really concerned about a 4-year contract. And I said, well, John, it's okay. Let's just do a 1-year contract. I might not like it either. He goes, oh, we can't do that. How about 2? I said, okay. So I signed a 2-year contract, which again, you would never, ever do, Coach.
Right.
Coming in, I had years left on a contract at CBS, and we took 100% pay cut to come back and then move back to Nebraska. And so we did a 2-year contract. And so, I was on a short window of trying to be successful to earn my boss's confidence so that I could stay longer. And I finally went to him. I started in March, I believe, or April. And I went to him. I still have it in my I carry it with me. I have some things. And my first meeting notes that I ever had with a boss in 2009 with Chancellor John Christensen. I'm a little embarrassed. It wasn't even typed out, the agenda. I wrote it out. And I basically in there asked him to define victory for me. And I said, John, after these 2 years, what will we have done that, what are you looking for from me? As a player, you want feedback from your coach. I want to be the best I can be. I want to get better. Tell me what you expect from me. And he said, I need a 25-year vision for financial stability in the UNO athletic department. And coach, I didn't even know what that meant. And so the best decision that I made was I went home. We're still in an apartment. My wife, 3 kids, a dog, and a bird, which was stressful in and of itself. And I told my wife, and she said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "I've been thinking about this. I have too much emotional investment in the state of Nebraska to just quit. So I am going to go and I am going to ask for help. And I'm going to start at the top. And if we go through all the businessmen and women leaders in the state of Nebraska and ask for help, and every one of them says, 'Trev, we don't care about UNO athletics,' then we can leave and say, 'We tried, they don't care.'" What I found was, what was amazing, Coach, was, and I'm not going to say names because I'm not trying to impress anybody, but they took my meeting. Mr. Buffett took my meeting. And you can't imagine the confidence that gave a young 39-year-old, inexperienced, poor leader who didn't even know what leadership was. And I tell people all the time, especially as you get to a certain age in your leadership journey, take time to take the meeting, And he directed me to who I should meet with. And it led to a working group that worked for 16 months. So almost 2 years after, I started in March or April 2009. We went to the Board of Regents in April of 2011. So it was a 2-year process of working with business and community leaders to try to solve the problem of UNO athletics. And it wasn't a problem of wins and losses. It was the business model that the university was uncomfortable with, the amount of taxpayer funds being spent to fund the athletics department.
And so it would seem like 2 paths emerged. You could either become a Division III athletic department,
right,
or you could become a Division I. And I'm sure many people, when it first came out that UNO was going to go in that direction, thought, how is going Division I a better financial model than going Division III? But I wasn't aware that that was that decision came out of a working group of what, 6 people?
Yep.
6 people.
Which, by the way, too, again, you can imagine. I was asked by this individual, "I will help you, but I'm going to create the working group committee. Are you okay with it?" Absolutely. "And when we're done with this process, will you have the courage to execute?" Absolutely. Well, I had no idea. And by the way, you mentioned what our process was. We spent the first month, Coach, looking at whether we should get rid of the entire athletics department at UNO.
Wow.
One of the options was, should we shut the entire thing down? Which my wife thought was pretty interesting when I went home. She said, "So now you're trying to eliminate your job?" And, but we looked at that. And then the next one is, can we stay at Division II, regain profitability in hockey? Because that's really where our challenge was. We had started a hockey program to offset the Division II costs, which isn't about revenue, it's about subsidy. But we lost profitability because we had moved to a 16,000 seat venue at the Quest Center, CHI Health, that no longer afforded us the opportunity to leverage, supply demand. And then the final one, was to move to Division I and move to Division I with what we could afford. So, the difference is, in our state, I think the biggest difference for a lot of people is that the University of Nebraska-Lincoln takes no taxpayer dollars and no student fees. In fact, we support the university with excess, self-generated revenue. Well, part of the rationale for Division I was we were looking at the athletic department a little bit differently than here, in the sense that if a certain portion of the budget, at that time it was probably 40% of the budget, is basically taxpayer money, which is funding the university. question is, how do we use that money as a tool to help UNO as an institution? So the athletic department is basically used, as the brand investment of the institution to help. So UNO had a lot of aspirations on the academic side. And the thinking was, if we were Division I and we were aligned with more peer-oriented institutions, that would help UNO. And that's how athletics was being viewed a little bit. And quite frankly, at that level, it's the way it ought to be viewed. It doesn't mean you still shouldn't try to win or can't win, but it's a little bit, if you just have a vision of wins and losses at a place where taxpayers are funding a significant portion of it, you must have a bigger and broader vision than that. And that's what we were trying to do at UNO.
Well, as you know, the summer of 2011, Rose gives me a call and asks, and she says, Terry, we'd like you to come and talk to our boosters and donors. And I said, sure. And then she said, oh, by the way, we're dropping football. And this will be the first meeting where these people come together. And I certainly, I didn't enjoy the idea that football was being dropped, but I enjoyed the challenge because I knew it was going to be an intense audience. There was great disappointment among teams like women's volleyball, which could compete for a national championship at Division II, but wasn't even going to be eligible for 3 years to compete for a championship at Division I. But it was it certainly was a courageous decision, and I'm also certain that beyond the financial aspects, if I'm a student, not a student athlete, I would much prefer to go to a school where there is an athletic department because it's
part of the
great.
experience.
Yeah, it's part of the experience. And so in your time there, a lot of really good things happen. You upgrade the facilities, you have success in sports, and I don't know, I noticed, yeah, you can find anything on Facebook. And I noticed a Facebook page that was organized that was basically anti-Trev Alberts. But by 2013, nobody posted anymore. So it was, and I don't think that was just inertia. I think people saw good things happening and it was going in the right direction. When Nebraska hired Bill Moose to follow Coach Osborne, I have to assume that somebody must have talked to you at that point. That were you a candidate at that point for the?
I did not talk to anybody when they hired Sean Eichhorst.
Okay.
I didn't speak with anybody then. I did have the search firm reached out to me. The folks from Turnkey reached out when I hired Bill and asked me to interview on a certain date. And I respectfully declined.
Uh-huh. And what was your reason at that point for that?
Well, part of the whole process at UNO, first of all, I really enjoyed working at UNO. We built a wonderful team. And Coach Osborne always drilled into our heads to be finishers. Be a finisher in life. Be a finisher. And so, when you're running the gasser, don't pull up 10 yards be a finisher. And part of that was if you create the mentality of being a finisher, when it's critical in the fourth quarter, when your body doesn't want to do it anymore, but you have, conditioned yourself to be a finisher, you've got a better chance of actually being successful. And so that darn phrase just will not get out of my head, Coach. I mean, I'll go for a jog and I'll have, 4 houses left before I get to mine. And you naturally kind of want to ease in and I'm like, finish. I mean, finishing has been, drilled into our heads. And we had the truth of the matter is, and I want to be very clear, Coach, I wasn't perfect in that whole In fact, there were a lot of things that I could have done better as a leader. I've made a lot of mistakes, and I've learned a lot. And I think that's part of the whole process of growing and as a leader is, you have to be humble enough to recognize that there's opportunity for growth. And a lot of that was new. I made plenty of mistakes, would have maybe done some things differently. I
have to tell you an interesting story. One of the most interesting scenes I've ever seen. I'm walking over to the Coliseum to practice sometime in the 90s, and the football team is walking out of the practice facility, the original practice facility, which is a smaller facility. And all of a sudden, somebody in a helmet is going full speed and tackles somebody walking over to the locker room. I'm sure it was a leadership moment, that it was not done. It was not a friendly gesture. It was somebody saw somebody who wasn't finishing, that was what the issue was, that they didn't believe that person quite got it yet. And I'm not sure that you want to solve all issues that way, but it stayed with me. It was impressive. So in 2017, I'm gonna read some things to you here, and you'll either be energized by this list or depressed. From 1992 to 2004, Nebraska wins 3 national championships in football, 2 in volleyball. Men's gymnastics wins its 8th national championship. Women's gymnastics wins 3 regional championships. Baseball goes to 3 College World Series. Women's softball to 2 College World Series. Men's basketball is in 4 NCAA tournaments. Nebraska women's soccer plays in 7 consecutive NCAA tournaments. Nebraska wrestling wins 2 of its only 3 conference championships. Nebraska track, Nebraska bowling do well. Women's basketball does well. Also, I believe the best basketball coach in Nebraska history has hired Connie Yori. And I'm going to say that had there been more athletic leadership or better athletic leadership at that time, they would have worked through that, and Connie Yori would have continued to coach at Nebraska. I look at Creighton women's basketball going into the Sweet 16.
That was a great win.
Connie Yori is a volunteer assistant there. And I know the head coach, Jim, and he's a wonderful head coach. She's impacting that program there. But the real question here is, what happened? Where did all this go? All that success? And I think there's several possibilities, but I have an idea. I'd like your insight. The athletic department you inherited was not the athletic department that you were a part of when you were a student athlete in terms of success, in terms of overall success.
Well, what's the question? I'm sorry, Coach.
What was it? Where did all that success go?
Well, it's a great question, and I don't have all the answers, and we have so many great people here, and some of the very people you've already talked about who had the success, are still here, and boy, Mark wrestling just finished 5th in the nation, an amazing. I don't know. I think I believe so strongly in this. Leadership matters. And again, I'm not sitting in judgment of any past leaders. I've learned long ago, you make decisions with the information you have at the time you have it, do the best you can. I think it starts at the top, and I think you have to create unity of purpose on your executive team. I can tell you that when I first got here and I went to my first senior staff meeting, there were three factions within the senior staff. It felt like there was some fairly significant tension. There wasn't a lot of transparent communication or trust that was, on the senior staff level. And so you can just imagine, I mean, if that's the way it is, that permeates down, whether, then I also think you have to ask yourself a fundamental question. Coach was also really good at doing this as well. And it's the reason I got into athletic administration in 2009. It was, the people that we have here, you can ask one or two questions. First of all, is he or her here to be served or to serve others? And the way I felt, the reason I chose, I just had an opportunity to meet with a prospective student athlete, football player who has an offer from every elite team in the country. And, I was talking to him and his family a little bit about my decision to leave Iowa to come here. And Iowa was a great institution and we were Hawkeye fans. But there was a feeling when I came here that this was a place that every single person here knew what their role was. They were held accountable to it, and they were here to serve the student athletes. They weren't here to be served. And so I think that might be part of it. I think a lot of it's communication, it's investment, it's trust. I've really enjoyed having conversations. Coaches have been very honest with me and talked about, hey, we've all been burned. And part of that is, you can imagine my conversations with some head coaches, and that first one is, to be honest with you, it's awkward, it's short, and after several months, it's 2 hours long, and you're diving into details. But they, they have to. You are a coach, you gotta feel confident that the administration is, that you can trust what their word is when they tell you something, it's actually going to happen. So I don't know. It's been hard, but I also think you have to be honest. The Big Ten, from a competitive standpoint, the Big 8, and then going to the Big 12, and now to the Big 10. I mean, you look across the board, the investments that are being made in every sport program in the Big 10. They all have the same resources. The television deal has been the great equalizer for all of us, and so. We're in a tough conference with a lot of great coaches, and I think administratively, maybe a little bit of entitlement and a little bit of a lack of discipline and accountability, and we're trying to bring that back.
Yeah, and I think from the, people could say, well, we had ADs that didn't work out, we had coaches maybe that didn't work out, we changed conferences, but to me there were two factors. The first is, I don't think people realize how much trust was created throughout the department by two people that were not particularly close. One was Bill Byrne. Bill Byrne was an extraordinary athletic director, and he had no problem sitting down with someone in the cafeteria. It might have been the volleyball coach, it might have been the women's gymnastics coach or the football coach, and saying, what's it going to take to win a national championship? And I will help you, but these are my expectations. The second one was when Coach Osborne retired. I believe the wake of that wasn't felt, the depth of that wasn't felt for several years, because when he retired, first of all, you took one of the great, brilliant minds, offensive minds in college football, and removed that person. And you had a staff that was assembled to be complementary to him, but might not be complementary to the next head coach. Secondly, if I was the athletic director and John Cook retires, John would have never been the next volleyball coach at Nebraska had he not gone to Wisconsin and proved as a head coach he was going to be a great head coach. It's kind of like your situation. You have no idea what it means to be an AD when you're an assistant AD. You have no idea what it is to be a head coach until you're a head coach. And then it wasn't because anybody was motivated by the wrong things. Everybody thought when Steve Peterson came in that things were going to be great, that he was maybe one of the brightest minds I've ever been around, but had difficulty creating trust. And nothing moves forward without trust. And you can't have trust without vulnerability and intimacy. And for whatever reason, that didn't happen. And then it became a series of dominoes that is played out. One of the reasons that I was so supportive when I found out you were coming back to the athletic department, you're an outlier for an AD. There's very few ADs today that have any idea what it means to be a competitive athlete, or what it means, what coaching is about. And I don't know the Nebraska budget, but I would guess that you spend as much on coaching salaries as you do scholarships. And
a lot more.
We have all these services for athletes. I'm not even sure they have to tie their shoes, but they've got sports psychs and regular psychs and conditioning and training. I don't know of any schools that have developmental support for coaches. That there's no investment there. And I can't think of any other business that would not do that, wouldn't want to be working to make coaches better. So I think you provide a talent and an experience that other athletic directors don't have. And I think it gives you a leg in the door with coaches because they know you've been there. I can't imagine any AD having more credibility with Scott Frost than Trev Alberts, than somebody who has, who has been on the field, who understands what Nebraska tradition is about. Having said that, I'm sure there were surprises when you took the job. I don't know. I mean, you were aware that men's basketball had struggled. You were aware that football had struggled. I know that there were some financial things that you weren't aware of, but I don't know that anyone else could have had the patience nor the negotiating skills to work out what you've worked out with football and basketball. And to me, they're also two different situations. And do you see that? I mean, football was very competitive.
Yeah.
And appeared to have more of the team aspects that you've talked about. Basketball, my least favorite word is swagger. Swagger is bullshit. I want people that can pass the ball and can cover their attackers. And I want a process. I want a process for how you win. And for someone, and maybe I'm being overly critical, but when I watched Nebraska basketball this past season, up until about the midpoint of the season, I didn't see any process at all. I didn't see, people would cross midcourt and somebody shooting 28% on threes would take the shot instead of somebody shooting 43% on threes. I guess one question would be, am I out to right field on all that, or is...
No, you're not. And I think it goes back a little bit to and it's what I'm really passionate about. I mean, I really hope, Coach, that if I'm not a better athletic director in 2 years, then I'm not doing my part. I mean, we all, there's a thing I learned in watching these business leaders in Omaha. I mean, I never went to a meeting at the Kiewit building in my 12 years there when Mr. Buffett's car wasn't sitting there. He's there every day, getting better, learning something new, right? Looking for something new to invest in. And so, I think sometimes I see coaches, they can fall into one of two traps, and they can say, well, this is my system. This is what I run. And this is what I've had success with. And the reality is, how do you win basketball games in the Big Ten? Or how do you win volleyball games in the Big Ten? I would bet that John's approach in our volleyball program now probably is a little bit different based on what the competition in the Big Ten looks like than what it was in the Big 12. I don't know.
And not just the Big Ten, how the game has evolved.
That's exactly right. And I think the best coaches that I've been around or I've observed, first of all, have a certain level, that takes a certain level of humility, right? You have to have confidence, but you have to have enough humility to be able to be constantly looking at the evolution of the game, where it's going, where it's been, and this is the league we're in. How, what is the right system or structure that allows us to be successful in the Big Ten? Well, you might have to create a different strategy because this is what the elite team's doing. Until we can get there, we might have to have this system because we can acquire this kind of talent. So there's some strategic thinking, behind what that process looks like. Look, I think we have coaches that are still growing in that area, and that's okay. But I agree with you. I think I think that part of it is will be an important part for all of our programs. But
why did things get better in basketball the last third of the year?
Well, I think I got to be a little bit careful here because and I meet with Fred all the time, and I like Fred and not unlike Scott and the rest of our coaches, but I think at some point, Coach, he's going to talk a little bit about changes. I think everybody gets fixated on the changes with personnel. And they think, that's the extent of the changes. The reality is, sure, Scott removed some assistants and hired some new ones, and they've given a lot of energy, but that's not the entirety of the change that he was focused on. And so, I don't want to get into too much detail, but Fred made some fairly significant changes in his approach and the teaching approach on how he was handling certain aspects of the program. And I'd like to let that be Fred's words. But so Fred made some very significant changes, Coach, in the preparation, the approach, and how the particular defense was communicated to the team and approached. And, I think some of the discipline and accountability and expectations, were communicated more broadly. And, I think that's the fascinating thing. It's not just basketball, it's not football, it's across the board. I think what's interesting is we can get ourselves in a trap that, well, in 2022, you got to be careful with young people because they really, young people want accountability. They want discipline. They want expectations. They want it to be done fairly, but they really do. They feel more confident and comfortable if you say, no, this is the standard and this is what we do and here's the box. And I think the more confident coaches are more confident in demanding that structure, discipline, and accountability that's necessary ultimately to get you on those, as we've talked about previously, those thin margins in the Big Ten. Where everybody is aspiring to the same thing. You absolutely must have the discipline, structure, and accountability if you're going to be successful.
Well, I thought when you mentioned Warren Buffett going to work every day, I mean, it is the most important thing in leadership is to be present.
Yeah.
And you cannot do it by remote control. There's no emotional engagement. There's no it's impossible to build any trust in that situation. And I guess I study coaches every day and watch them, and whether their team is, you can do that with not very little talent and still create trust and still have a competitive team. And you can have a lot of talent. And so I thought it was an interesting study. They were picking up players closer on the perimeter. They were working the ball inside out. They were, it was fun to watch. And I would hope the debris field on a season like that is, some people get blamed. I would see things on social media that people were blaming Doc for the defense. Doc wasn't even allowed to be in practice, wasn't even allowed to coach. And he certainly knew how to coach defense, but that's all interesting. What's your definition of leadership today? And there's, I don't think there is one, the guy who keeps the ball on the 3-yard line and runs for a touchdown, that's one form of leadership. The guy who comes back to the huddle and says, "Hey, I'm open, they're disregarding me," that's a form of leadership. I had a student manager once, we're playing at Penn State, and he didn't even sit on the bench. And because there was a sniper in town, nobody was at the game in Rec Hall. And we're playing a good Penn State team. And we get to the 5th game of a tight match. There's a timeout. And he walks out into the huddle and he says, "Coach, in the first rotation, when Billy comes up the middle, they've ignored her all night." This is a student manager.
That's awesome.
And he never said anything to me after that, never said anything to me before that. I went back and said, "Okay, let's hit Billy on the 2 coming up the middle." Bam, side out, you win the match.
But why was he confident and comfortable in bringing that forward?
I think it was trust. I think he knew I wasn't going to hang him out at that point. He knew enough not to say the fact that I hadn't recognized it meant it was some information that maybe I hadn't gotten. He also went on and became a college coach later. His name was Corey Helly, and runs a club in South Carolina. You mentioned one of Tom Osborne's gifts. I think great coaches have a way of making everyone feel as if their job is important. Yeah. What they do is important.
Yep.
And that if it has to be done, when I was with Nebraska volleyball, we wanted our uniforms to be the best. We wanted how we warmed up to be the best. We wanted to know how we interacted with fans. Everything had to be done at that level. And I would have to say that when I said one of the dramatic things that impacted Nebraska sports, I picked a lot of that up from Coach Osborne. I watched him. I watched, why is this program operating at this level? What has application to us? And I also think when your flagship programs are having success, it infuses the rest of the department.
Absolutely.
It motivates the department. And he was always very generous to me. I mean, he sometimes to a fault, like after he had his heart attack, he asked if I'd fly up with him to someplace to fish in Nebraska.
You take good care of him, probably.
But there's no question, when football would lose in the 90s, there would be a pall come over the city.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like the streets of Laredo. And so that position was critical. If he interacted with other coaches, if he interacted with non-revenue sports, if he was interested, And so I think with that type of position, and certainly John is in that position now, John Cook, you want to be generous. You want to have as much impact on other programs as possible. I remember somebody saying to me that, well, I think we ought to get rid of the sports that don't make money. Nebraska volleyball makes money. So I said, well, then you're talking about getting rid of the library. The library doesn't make any money.
There'd be a lot of things we're getting rid of, huh?
Chemistry department. But so back to my original question here. What's the best? Give me a couple sentences on what leadership is for Trev Alberts.
Well, to me, the most important thing is, and you know, there's no one right or wrong, but I think you have to be authentic. You know, we live in a world today that, you know, just more than ever, I think, and just be who you are. Don't try to act. I think people appreciate people. Listen, I'm a sinner like anybody else. I have a lot of flaws, Coach. You know, I think sometimes I watch people get into leadership positions and they think, now I'm the leader now. I've got to be the leader. And let me just tell you, listen, I have the same, you know, problems and things that everybody else has. I have bad days. I make, you know, poor decisions. I think being authentic is really, really important. I think you have to be humble enough to understand who you are. Like I said, I have some strengths, I really do, but I also have some fairly significant weaknesses, and you have to have enough personal security to try to augment your weaknesses with elite talent, and then trust them and let them do their job. You know, I'm really proud. It's only been 9 months, but we have a very high functioning executive staff right now. We've got some new people, you know. Unfortunately, Pat Logston finally said, I have to leave, Trev. So she retired, but we've got a new senior women's administrator, Marquita Armstead, and she'll do a tremendous job. But we've got a new CFO. So we've got some folks that have been here that understand the culture, which was really important to me. And then we've got some new folks who have a different perspective. But there is nothing that we don't have the trust in with each other to discuss. As you can imagine, in 2022, some very challenging conversations, and we do them together. And we don't always agree, but we have enough trust. Everybody can speak their mind. And then when we leave, we're unified. There's not going to be any cracks between it. And, you know, where nobody's going to be working strategically, trying to position himself to get over here. That can't work. And so I think you have to be authentic. You have to be transparent. And then I think as a leader, people are looking for a vision. They're looking for a communicable strategy and vision of saying, where are we going and what's my role in it? And then you gotta let them perform their role. And then when they do a great job, which they will, that's when they feel the value. Is they're like, wow, I really contributed here. But if there's this constant turnover, and if there's constant different leadership, and there's a different strategy and a different, you know, I'll be honest, I was just kind of, you talked about the past and how it's, you know, trust. We made some small changes, Coach. I mean, I reduced the size of the executive staff by a couple folks and hired a new CFO. And I had some folks who, you know, kind of communicated to me that they're just kind of gearing up for that second wave of restructuring, and said, do I have a spot here? Am I, you know? And I said, what do you mean? And so there's some residual of all of the, and I think some calluses from the past of some of this stuff that it'll take some time. You know, I've tried to work really hard to build relationships and build the trust with coaches, because I think that's, but beyond just the senior staff now, we've got a lot of other staff that we still have to engage in those areas of trust. And, That doesn't happen overnight. People are watching. When I say we're going to be the hardest working athletic department in the country, I have to do that myself. I have to be here early and stay late and, make that commitment. It can't just be, words. So, I think, I don't know, that's not a very good answer to your question.
No, it is a good answer. I sure appreciate you taking the time out of your day. There's a lot of things you might be better served doing than talking with an old coach on a podcast. But
no, I just hope I don't get in trouble. Did I say anything that's going to get me in trouble? If so, I'm going to blame you.
I don't know that you're doing your job if you don't say something that's.
Well, that's the other thing I did learn, to be honest, with a lot of those business folks, is that that if everybody loved you after a short amount of, after a while, then you weren't doing anything.
Terry, that was a fascinating interview with Trev Alberts. What was your big takeaway?
Well, I thought it was very intimate and open. And I guess if there were two countries talking, you would say it was a frank discussion. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope our audience did, and they can help us in several ways. The first is to go out and share it with friends. The more you do that, the more listens we get, the better it is for us. You can go to terrypettit.com and subscribe to the podcast. And I'm sure we're going to have somebody equally exciting coming up. So thanks for being a part of it.
Thank you, Coach Pettit.